Hi, I'm Rolf Paredes with Shooter's Paradise. This video is being made for our Patreon subscribers only. This is a part 2 to our video about Aggressor Doctrine in the state of Louisiana. Very important to remember, this is in the state of Louisiana. So if you haven't seen the other video, it's on the Patreon page, you need to go watch that one first. I'm not going to rehash the information that's in that one. This is going to go a little deeper. So go watch the other video first. All right, good to see you back. All right, so what we left off with in the other video is that I had come to the conclusion, and I'm no legal scholar, verify this information yourself. There are 4 main parts to Louisiana Aggressor Doctrine in criminal court. Civil court has some other considerations that I'm not going to address here. In criminal court, I need to be aware of 4 items. The first one is there has to be an original aggressive act. It can be pretty minor, but there has to be an aggressive act. The second item is you didn't retreat, you didn't back down, you never broke off the hostilities as they were building. The third item is this escalates to violence, because if it doesn't, the whole thing is just a moot point. And then the fourth item on my list here is that the victim's responses have to be reasonable. Every step along the way, whatever I do that's aggressive, he has to have a reasonable response to that. If he acts unreasonably, then I'm off the hook. So all 4 things have to be there in order for me to be the original aggressor. So I simply, in order to not be the original aggressor and ensure that I always have the right to claim self-defense justification, all I have to do is make sure that those 4 things don't apply to me. Maybe a little easier said than done because of our subconscious brain and how we react to conflict, but I think it's doable. So first of all, I want to look at the first element, that there has to be an original aggressive act. And I have something I'm going to read to you because I want to get it exactly correct. Not every act of a defendant will make him an aggressor. It is the character of the act, coupled with the intent of the defendant, that determines whether the defendant is the aggressor. And this is from a case, State versus Call, that's 146 LA 597. The citation I would use for this is 83 South 844. Now, I haven't been able to find this case. My case searching skills leave quite a bit to be desired, but this case is from 1919, so this goes back a long ways. So not every act of a defendant will make him an aggressor. Not everything we do puts us on the hook as the original aggressor. It is the character of the act coupled with the intent of the defendant. So what the act actually is and what my intent was, if I was intending to cause trouble, that's a key part. And then I'll also read this to you. The act of aggression which would therefore preclude asserting the right to self-defense must be such that the response elicited from the victim by the aggressive act can be termed a reasonable response to that act. So in order for me to lose my right to claim self-defense justification, then every time I do something that is an aggressive act toward that individual, he has to respond reasonably. If he ever responds unreasonably, then I'm off the hook. Okay, so we see that the response from the person that I'm being aggressive toward has to be reasonable in order for me to be on the hook for being the original aggressor. The second item, I don't retreat. That's Louisiana Revised Statutes 1421. It's pretty clearly laid out there, and I talked about that before. The thing has to escalate to violence because inherently, if there's no violence that comes from this, then it's a moot point. And then, of course, the fourth and final thing, the victim's responses were reasonable. That's what we just addressed. So I'd like to look at a couple cases that I think you'll find interesting. First case is Frank Tripoli versus Jack Gurry and his mother and a couple other things there, et al. That case citation is 218 South 2nd 563. So this is a case, and this happened in the mid-60s. This is a case where a group of young men, I always say avoid groups of men, young men, they're full of testosterone, it's a horrible drug. So this group of young men were in a store, and most stores in the mid-60s would have a counter where they would sell and serve food and sodas and root beer, stuff like that. So they were sitting at the counter and they had ordered some food. And a conflict arose between the boys. And they were talking horribly to one another, vulgarities and all kinds of stuff were flying around, caused a scene. And the individual, Frank Tripoli, who worked at the store, came up to the boys and said to, calm down and quit using that language, yada, yada, yada. Those boys then continued. Frank had no effect on them. They continued to mouth off to each other. That's key point. They never mouthed off to anyone else in the store. Their conflict was solely between them. And so, as things built up there, Frank told a co-worker, call the police. The police were 2 blocks away. There was a police station 2 blocks away. And so, Jack Gurry, I'll just call him Gurry after this, Gurry realized that he was fixing to have to deal with the police, and he didn't want that. So he leaves out of the store. And at first he said, I'm not leaving until I get the food that I ordered. And then when it's apparent that he's going to have to deal with the cops, he says, okay, I'm out of here. And he leaves the store. Well, Frank Tripoli was not satisfied with that. He was not satisfied because he wanted these young punk kids. Remember, this is mid-60s. He wanted these young punk kids to have to toe the line. So he followed Gurry out of the store with a pad of paper and a pen to write down Gurry's license plate number so the police could go and deal with Gurry later. Well, Gurry apparently asked him, why are you following me? And he said, I'm going to get your license plate. And Gurry said, I don't have a car. I came on the bus, which apparently was correct. So Gurry was walking toward the bus stop to leave the area and get on the bus and go home. And Frank Tripoli was not happy with this. He continued to follow Gurry, and then came up and he put his hands on Gurry's person. And the court makes the point he had no right to do that. Because what laws were broken? These kids hadn't broken any laws. Now, in Louisiana, you can make a citizen's arrest. Don't do it. Don't do it. But you can make a citizen's arrest for a felony. These kids hadn't even broken a misdemeanor. They hadn't broken any laws. They had simply caused a scene. Well, so the court said Frank Tripoli had no right to put his hands on Jack Gurry. Well, Jack Gurry, being a young man, his response to Frank putting his hands on him was to turn around and to shove him. Frank fell, broke his ankle. That was a pretty bad deal. So, and then of course Jack punched him once in the chin and scraped his chin a little, but that became a non-event when the police finally came in and looked at everything. Tripoli was in the hospital with a broken ankle. So the appellate court, Frank Tripoli sued Jack Gurry and his mother because apparently he was young enough to, mother had some culpability there, or he thought she did. So in the appellate decision from this case, the appellate court held that when Frank Tripoli followed Gurry out of the store and went and put his hands on him, that made him the original aggressor. And so then Gurry was completely justified in the shove that ended up breaking Frank's ankle. Now, and this, so I am going to get into civil court a little bit here. So then what was found is that when Jack stepped up and punched him once in the jaw, that punch went beyond Jack's reasonable response to Frank's aggression. And so then Jack would be guilty, or I should say he would be culpable. He would be able to be held accountable for the damages from that, which weren't much. It was not much of anything. But Jack Gurry skated free of anything to do with breaking the ankle, because that was an appropriate response from Gurry to the unwarranted aggression of Frank Tripoli. So that's a pretty interesting thing. And you can see how it would be pretty easy to be sucked into, here's bad kids doing bad stuff, and I gotta make sure that, you know, he doesn't get away with this. Yeah, well, unless he's committed a felony, I don't have any right to go stopping him. That's a pretty bad thing. So, simply following somebody and putting your hands on them made this individual the original aggressor in this situation. Let's look at another case. State versus Bellegarde. Citation for that one is 486 South 2nd 106. If I remember correctly, this is like 1986, this case. So what we have here is a fatal shooting. Ex-husband, wife, new man, in the kitchen. Love triangles, best way to get yourself killed. It is a super effective way to end up dead, is to get involved in a love triangle. So what happened is that individual stepped forward to the new man. Here, let me shake your hand and offer the hand of friendship. And the individual swung a pair of cowboy boots at him and then whipped out a gun and fired 4 shots. Obviously, that didn't end well. So in this case, the appellate court found that the individual who swung the boots was the original aggressor. And not because it was an overt act of violence, but it was the first aggressive act that happened. And then, of course, no one retreated. It ended up in an act of violence. And the victim's responses to the boot were reasonable, because when the guy swung the boots, the reasonable response was to hold him against the wall and say, hey, calm down. We don't need any trouble. That was a reasonable response. So that put the guy swinging the boots on the hook as the original aggressor. Small things can have big consequences. We have to take the off-ramp. When we're headed toward violence, we have to take the off-ramp and get off that highway leading toward violence. And unfortunately, the faster we drive, the harder it is to take the off-ramp. Okay, everybody can have a bad day. As I am a known pacifist, I want no trouble with anybody. Even I, in all my glory, I can have a bad day, and I can find myself being an aggressor towards somebody else. It is critical that the moment I realize that I am involved in something that could turn into conflict, it's critical that I put my hands up, take a step back, and say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know how this got this far. I don't want any trouble, and walk away, leave, get out of there. It's critical that I'm always seen retreating, because you never know where video cameras are. You never know where security cameras are. They're everywhere today. And witnesses. You never know when there's a witness out there. And if they see that and report what they saw, that will protect you from being the original aggressor, because that one very action regains you your original mantle of innocence and takes away that original aggressor status. So always, always retreat, put your hands up. By the way, this is a fence to protect you. Put your hands up and say, I don't want any trouble. Always do that. Make that part of your habit and your daily plan. It's very, very important. So again, the 4 things that I've identified here that will make you the original aggressor, all 4 of them have to apply. Number 1, there has to be an aggressive act, and it can be very minor. It does not have to be it doesn't have to involve physical violence or physical touching. And this is an interpretable thing. The next thing is you don't retreat. You ride this thing through, continuing the path toward aggression. The third thing is this actually escalates to a violent encounter. If that doesn't happen, then the whole thing is a moot point anyway. And the fourth and final thing is that the person you're aggressive toward must have a reasonable response to everything you've done. If that's the case, you're the original aggressor. If those 4 things apply, you're sunk. Because what are you going to do when the violence happens and somebody comes to you and says, hey, this happened, what's your excuse or what happened, and tell me, and you tell your side of the story, and you say, yes, I did this thing, but I was justified, and you give that affirmative defense. You're admitting to the underlying elements of a crime, and you're hanging your hat on justification to save your neck. And in that case, if those 4 things apply and you are the original aggressor, you're done, because you've already admitted to the underlying elements of the crime. And the law 1421, Louisiana Revised Statute 1421, has said that if you're the original aggressor, you are barred from self-defense justification. So hopefully this is helpful to actually lay out what it is, what the elements are of the original aggressor, and how it's applied. Hopefully that's helpful. Feel free to reach out and ask us questions. Remember, I'm not a legal scholar, so run this through your own filters, do your own research, and talk to your own attorney. I just offer this to you because I'm not finding this information anywhere else myself. I hope this is helpful. Thank you for watching.